Where exactly will Star Wars Resistance fall in the Star Wars timeline? Is it years before The Force Awakens? Or is it maybe right before those events? I reveal the answer to this question in today's video, but first I want to welcome you back to Force Within TV. I'm Mike, and on this channel we love the anticipation and speculation that leads up to Star Wars releases. So subscribe and join in the conversation by responding to the question of the day at the end of the video. So back on track to that question I started with. When exactly does the Star Wars Resistance animation show take place in the timeline? Well, after reading the episode 1 description for Star Wars Resistance, it seems that it has become very clear if you've read the novel Before the Awakening, that is. You see, the novel Before the Awakening is a book by Greg Rucka focusing on the lives of Finn, Rey, and Poe Dameron prior to the events of Star Wars The Force Awakens. This novel was an interesting read that shows us how Poe Dameron was recruited by the Resistance. According to the Wikipedia Star Wars Canon Timeline, the novel takes place less than a year before The Force Awakens and only shortly before the events of the beginning of the Poe Dameron comic. That's about 34 years after the Battle of Yavin. But why is all this important? Well, the description for Star Wars Resistance Episode 1 describes Poe as a Resistance pilot that is recruiting Kazuda Xiono. And Poe doesn't become a Resistance pilot until 34 years after the Battle of Yavin, less than a year before the events of The Force Awakens. So what this means is that Poe is recruiting Kazuda, or Kaz, less than a year before The Force Awakens. A lot of us, including myself, were assuming that this series would take place years leading up to the events of the movie The Force Awakens, similar to how Star Wars Rebels slowly leads up to the events of the movie A New Hope. So unless the translation of the Episode 1 description from German to English is completely wrong, then Star Wars Resistance is taking place right before the events of The Force Awakens. The best part about this is that the series might actually go beyond Episode 7. How many adventures can Kaz go on before he starts to get to that point in the timeline? I'd say that they could do no more than maybe 2 seasons before the events of The Force Awakens. But I wanted a second opinion, so I shared this news with my buddy Chris from the Star Raptor channel, and he mentioned a few things. First up is how he was hoping the Poe Dameron comic would keep going beyond The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, but it seems like the series is actually ending in September. And personally, I think it might be that they're canceling that series because they want to keep things open for the Resistance series. That is, of course, some wild speculation, but you never know. Another point that Chris made was that Episode 9 will be out soon, so they could take later seasons in interesting directions once they know the full sequel trilogy. And yeah, it's interesting because we're all assuming that this is going to be another 4-year series, but it's also interesting because Dave Filoni and crew have made a very big distinction between Star Wars Resistance and Star Wars Rebels, and that is in Star Wars Resistance we have absolutely no Jedi. And in Star Wars Rebels, the entire reason that show couldn't go beyond A New Hope, or the events of A New Hope, is the fact that Kanan and Ezra could not be around during the original trilogy. In this show, however, Star Wars Resistance, we don't have any Jedi. We're not running into that trouble. So Kazuda Xiono could absolutely be around during the events of The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and even beyond. We could even have the first 2 seasons leading up to The Force Awakens and then a time jump to after The Last Jedi, but before Episode 9. I believe the timing with that would be the year after Episode 9, so Filoni and crew would know exactly what happened with all the sequel trilogy and would be able to fill in some backstory for characters perhaps. But back to what Chris was saying, and he mentioned that the Resistance was actually being called the Rebellion a lot in The Last Jedi, so it may actually switch names, which really doesn't bode well for Star Wars Resistance the series, which would mean Star Wars Resistance the series shouldn't go beyond that point in the timeline. But I think with JJ back in control in Episode 9, the Resistance name will stick and will live on. It was part of his idea, after all, in The Force Awakens. I also mentioned this theory to Nick, who used to run the Official Boss channel, but it's now actually called Star Wars General, and he was excited that the series might go beyond The Force Awakens. He said, "Yes, I would love to see it go beyond The Force Awakens because it would share new light, to the Star Wars canon and give us all the information we need to know. And yeah, that's really what I'm excited about too, is the fact that this series could give us some backstory to maybe a character like DJ. We could run into him and some of those new characters that we know we're getting in episode 9. Heck, maybe even Lando's gonna pop into the show. I know I can't wait to get more information about Star Wars Resistance. It's exciting to speculate on what we might get from the show. And if you enjoy the anticipation and speculation that leads up to Star Wars releases, then this is the channel for you. So hit that subscribe button and use the force within you to make the Star Wars community a better place. Share your speculation and theories and encourage others to do the same. And you can start sharing right now in the comments section by answering the question of the day. Do you think the Resistance series will go beyond The Force Awakens? Let me know in the comments below, and may the Force be with you.